A very warm welcome from me. My name is Louise van Rijn. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder of the Partners for Possibility Leadership Development Principal Support Program, which is partly what we're going to talk about this afternoon, but we're also going to talk more broadly than just Partners for Possibility, just about this idea of principal leadership development as a key enabler for improving education systems. And on the call today, we have five of the most amazing thought leaders, joined by another more than 100 or so people who have an interest in the topic, either because they are in education or because they are involved in kind of educational change programs. So we have lots of educators and teachers and people from our education department on the call, and then just many other active citizens and people in the CSI department, funders, philanthropists. And this session today is part of our a series of events that we're having that's around the publication of the new Partners for Possibility book. And we're going to not just focus on Partners for Possibility, we are going to focus, as I said, more broadly. So as always, with of our Symphonia events, we want to start in a way that is consistent with our theory, which is around developing community and a sense of cohesiveness between us. So we're going to create an opportunity for you to go into a breakout room with about 3 other people. And the idea in the breakout room is really just for you to get connected, to feel a sense of connection before we just go in, and you're going to hear from lots of people. And there's a task for you to go, when you go into the breakout room, to firstly introduce yourself to the other people in your breakout room, and to then tell them, why did you decide to show up? What was it about this invitation that made you show up? And our panelists are also going to be in the breakout room, so that means that they're going to have a sense of connection with people that they previously wouldn't have met. I do want to just say to everybody that given the kind of people who show up at these events, you are in for a surprise. No matter what happens, no matter who you show up with, if you are in the room with the people who are on this call, it's going to be a joy and a wonderful experience of just being connected with some of the world's most fabulous people. So I'm going to, Zoom is going to do its thing. I'm going to just ask Zoom to do a very completely random assignment to 24 different breakout groups. I'm going to be in the breakout room for 6 minutes. A reminder that, sorry, I just want to get the background sound off. There will be a little sign that will come up and say you'll come back into the main room, and then we will just get a sense as to what was discussed in the breakout rooms before we continue. So there will be I'm opening the rooms now, and there will be an invitation on your screen to say you are invited to go to breakout room, whatever, and all you need to do is just click on that breakout room. In the breakout room, introduce yourself, tell people why you've decided to show up today. And we'll see you back here in about 6 minutes' time. We have with us a few people who can speak to that, who have huge amounts of experience, and we're going to invite them to share with us some of their thoughts on this. So I've asked them to, before they speak, I just want to share a little bit for all of our international guests, to give you a little bit of background about South Africa. So the South African context as the context of our conversation. So in South Africa, more than 80% of our principals are appointed as principals of complex organizations without any preparation for that task. They're a teacher one day and the next day they show up and they're expected to be a principal. So they know how to teach and they know how to manage a classroom and they understand curriculum, but they know very little about leading and management and how to lead specifically in our context, complex organizations with limited resources. So we have in our system, we have very small schools, 3 to 4 teachers and 200 learners. And then we have massive schools, 50, 60 teachers and 2,000 and more learners. And in rural schools, just also interesting kind of nuance. And in small schools, our principals are expected to lead and manage and teach. So they have a teaching load and then they're expecting to manage the entire organization, IT, finance, HR, facilities, all the challenges that they have around that. And we know that this is true of most countries in the global south. So this is not a uniquely South African issue. This is an issue that many countries in the global south grapple with. So as a way of starting our conversation, we've asked the same question to all 5 panelists. And the question is, given your background and experience, and our panelists are going to tell us a little bit about their background and experience as part of their introduction, why do you think that principal leadership development is a key enabler to improving education system? And we've asked our panelists to share their background and experience and how that relates to this so that you can all get an idea around the kind of depth of experience that we have in the group. And we're going to ask our audience members to listen very carefully and to share what struck them and pose any questions that they may have to the panelists, and we'll keep an eye on those questions and I'll make sure that we pose them to the panelists. So, and our request today is that all of us listen with an expectation and a willingness to be changed by what we're hearing. So that's going to keep us on the edge of our seats. And the first person to respond to that question is Dr. Asma Al-Fadala. She's the head of research at the World Innovation Summit for Education. And she's also the founder of an amazing initiative called WISE All In, which I'm sure she's going to tell you a little bit about. So Asma, over to you, and we're going to listen with curiosity and interest to what you have to say in response to that.
Thank you, Louise. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning if you are in a different time zone than Doha. Thank you for the introduction, for the invitation. I'm honored to be in such a distinguished panel and such a diverse group. To answer this question, Louise, we all know that schools are one of the most important institutions in society, and principals have an important role in leading these institutions and positively impacting teaching and learning. And this is not something new or a new finding, because number one, the importance of the role of principals, and two, the role of school leadership as a policy priority to improve education systems have been documented repeatedly by educators and researchers who are focusing on leadership and organizations concerned with ensuring that all students have access to high quality education. So we are all clear about this importance. However, the positive impact of school leadership doesn't occur by default. Instead, principals must be prepared, developed, and continually supported, especially in countries that don't require a compulsory and specific qualification for principalship. As you mentioned in South Africa, the same case in Qatar and other countries. And just to highlight my research in Qatar, I found that the principals are not different from other countries. They need support in leading successful schools, such as helping them to collaborate, helping them to network, and to set up an enabling and supportive system. And there are many examples around that. At WISE, we have been running a multi-year program called Empowering Leaders of Learning, with the focus that principals cannot work alone. I want to emphasize here on the role of working as teams and working together and learn from each other. We need principals who work in teams bounded by a set of shared values and deep sense of psychological safety. I wish Louise will give me more time to share more examples, but this is how we improve education systems. The challenge in our current understanding of school improvement is not knowing what schools ought to do, but knowing how principals can get those things done. Let me emphasize on this sentence. Systems' ability to engage and involve principals in improvement processes is a missing resource in many schools. And this is how I work with local schools, and it's not an easy job. In my work in Qatar, let me end with this, and my research on the systemic educational change that Qatar went through. I did this through my PhD work, and I have my external examiner, Karen Edge, who gave me great feedback on my PhD thesis, looking at school leadership in Qatar. I found that this reform missed, as have many other education reform efforts globally. This is the crucial leadership piece, the importance of school leadership, continuous learning. And there is much that needs to be done to develop cohesive systems to address this ongoing challenge, including further investment in high quality development programs, like the program Louise is leading, to emphasize on leadership for learning by creating a culture that leaders and their teams in their schools, that they can learn from each other. I'll stop here. I'll give a chance to the other panelists to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Asma, and we are going to come back to you later. So this is just everybody to get a sense of the quality of the contributors that you're going to hear from today. So Asma was our first contributor. We're now going to hear from Brian Levy. Brian is a professor at Johns Hopkins University, and he is also a professor in Cape Town. When he's able to travel, then we see him here, and he's been just one of those. It's been an amazing privilege to be able to have Brian as a thought leader that we could talk to. So Brian, and Brian's also the author of a very interesting book, which I'm sure he's going to tell you about. Over to you, Brian.
Thanks, Louise, and it's my pleasure to be here. So the question we're asked, I think I'm going to give a very quick, short answer to it, but it's what's behind that question is interesting. So why are principles central? Principles are central because the success in an organization trying to do something craft-oriented and complex depends upon the activation of energy, motivation, and agency. And it depends on doing that in a way that leverages the broader ecosystem within which that organization functions. Who is the point person that is ideally situated to enable those things to happen in a school? That point person is the principal. So that's why principles are central. Now that's the easy answer. Here's the more complicated part of the answer. It actually comes to how I came to meet Louise. The answer I gave you does not come from decades and decades and decades of being an educationalist scholar. It comes from a broader experience on trying to understand how change happens and what it takes to evoke change. I actually left South Africa in 1977, studied, taught, joined the World Bank, where I worked for almost 25 years, focused on the challenges of capacity development. There's a book that I did called Building State Capacity in Africa. And I returned to South Africa in 2010 to help start the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance at UCT. But in so doing, I really wanted to take on a research project that I thought could contribute and have some deep, deep meaning. So I made that project the politics and governance of education. And what I discovered was, and we know this, I mean, we probably all know the story, if you have a hammer, you see nails everywhere. What I discovered was that as an outsider who had not spent decades and decades and decades working on education, anything I had to say on this was viewed with a certain discomfort. Do you really know education? Who are you to say? Now, importantly, and I'll come back to this, I think the world is a world of both and, not a world of either or. So 7 or 8 years into the research on this book, Politics and Governance of Basic Education, a comparison school level and provincial level in the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape. I did some book launches. I did 2 launches in Cape Town. And in the audience at the first launch, there was someone who I didn't know who was very excited and enthusiastic about the work. And I didn't have a chance to talk to that person after her questions. But then I gave the launch the next day, and there was Louise a second time. And what I discovered was that we had this shared passion in the space, this shared commitment to the sense that it's the evocation of agency that is critical to change, a shared sense that that's embedded within the broader ecosystem, that the principle and the community are the key to making that happen. And I hope that we'll have lots of opportunity to talk about this as the session goes on, and the sense that that vision of the world risks colliding with a vision of the world which saw the problems of education and many problems. My confession, my training actually is in economics. I have the same issue. We saw many problems colliding as technical problems, not problems around the evocation of agency. So that's how Louise and I connected, and that's why I just love doing this. So.
Thank you, Brian. I want to say to Brian that Professor Volmink is one of the people who, when he saw your name on the invitation, he said, I have to be there. So Professor Volmink, a big warm welcome to you as a fan, another fan of Brian Levy. We've already got this amazing sense of diversity between Asma and Brian. And now we're going to go to Shelby. Shelby is a professor at the University of Illinois in Chicago. She has lots of experience in leadership development, specifically principal leadership development, and has been the leader of an award-winning principal leadership development program for many years. And it's always interesting for me to present what we're doing to people like Shelby and Asma and Brian and Corin. And so to have Shelby say, wow, this is quite exciting, was a huge exciting moment for us. So Shelby, over to you. Why do you think this matters so much? You've dedicated huge amounts of your life to this idea and to this work.
Yeah, so we've been spending a lot of time thinking about both the within school and beyond school factors that have an impact on student learning. And so if we start with the within school factors, we have a logic model that we pay a great deal of attention to that specifies in broad ways the things that most matter or are most consequential for impacting student learning. And from a very research-oriented perspective, there are 3 things that are consequential. Leadership, that's on the very far outside dimension of the school. And as especially Asma has really talked about, we think about leadership not just from the role of the principal, but in a very distributed fashion. There are numbers of people within a school that can provide critical leadership. Leadership is most important, though, because it impacts 2 things before we get to the students. It impacts the organization directly, and it impacts instruction directly. And the only thing in schools that directly impacts student learning is instruction and the quality of instruction. And so leaders become so important because they can shape conditions in the organization that can shape conditions for improving instruction. And they can directly shape conditions that are improving instruction. And so when we think about leaders and why do they matter to student learning outcomes, they matter because leadership is the one thing that's consequential to both a variety of organizational conditions that matter and instruction that matters. When I look at what's happening in South Africa, what's really amazing to me is that the things that I've been talking about are the within school factors, but that are beyond school factors that are consequential to student learning also. And what you're doing in South Africa that to me is so consequential is you're building a very strong bridge between the things outside the school that are consequential to student learning and the things inside the school. Ultimately, there are resources in communities that can be harnessed as learning resources to support support learning resources of schools, but very few schools have learned how to harness the community as an asset or a resource to that school. And so what I see the programs in South Africa doing really well is building a very deliberate bridge to the community assets. And what happens is the business partner, it's not just tapping into his or her expertise as a learning resource for the principal and the leaders, but that person helps to potentially build all sorts of key connections to resources and assets in the community that can help to either strengthen the school organization, strengthen instruction, or directly have an impact on the student's home context that can be a resource for learning. So from my perspective, the programs in South Africa have developed a really important way to develop leaders, but how to tap into the assets of community to strengthen those kinds of things that are most consequential to improving student learning. And so for me, I can look at the program and I can see things that are of high value, but it also helps me to begin to think about my under-resourced communities in Chicago and how we start to think much more strategically and deliberately about how to connect within school and beyond school resources for the benefit of student learning. So anyway, it's exciting to be here. Thank you so much.
Sylvie, I just want to say to you, when you get what we do in such a beautiful, I mean, you and Brian and Asma, I can't tell you what that does to us. And in a way, it's kind of mirroring, you know, what happens with our business leaders when they go into schools. They come back and they stand in awe of the principal, and then that principal start to see themselves, you know, from the eyes of someone who is in awe. But it feels a bit like that to me right now. So when I hear you describe what we're doing in such eloquent, beautiful language, and I see Gail on the call, Gail's one of my colleagues, and she's always helping. Gail's like out of her skin to hear you, and we're kind of thinking, we're going to capture this and we're going to share it with other people. Thank you so much for just that beautiful way of understanding what we're doing, but also for bringing your beautiful thought leadership to this. And we'll come back to Shelby. I also want to just invite anybody, if you are touched or inspired by anything you're hearing, or you want to share a response. Professor Volmink has been one of the people who've been challenging us to create artifacts. And one of the artifacts we're creating today is this kind of the chat and the conversation we're having. So please, your voice matters, and we'd love to hear your voice. We are just going to make sure that we hear from all the panelists, and then we're going to do another round. The next person to hear from is Corinne Edge. Now, you have heard Asma referring to Corinne as one of her supervisors when she was doing her doctorate. Corinne is a very good friend of all of us who are in this space. She's just one of the most, you know, enthusiastic and bright lights in the space. When I said to Kat, you have to meet Corinne. Today is also an opportunity to get Corinne and Kat and other people on the same call. So Corinne, without any further ado, we'd love to hear from you. You have been a real inspiration for all of us. And just why do you care so much about principal leadership? And Corinne's also incredibly very involved with principal leadership organizations around the world, in Scotland, in Canada, and I mean all over the world. Corinne, so you can tell us your own story. I'm not going to even try to tell you.
Thank you. So it's really lovely to be here. Hi everybody from London. It's sunny at the moment, but it's been sunny and rainy on and off really quickly. So it could get really dark and then you'll hear the rain smashing against the window. Just ignore it. It's interesting. There's a few things about my own journey and story that have all connected within the space of the last 10 minutes. What I loved about the video and why I was so intrigued about the program was that concept of the principle is not to be fixed, but to be supported. And I think that is what's run through all of my work with school leaders that I've done in all of the different countries I've worked in. Brian and I did not cross paths, but I was also at the World Bank for about 9 months at the beginning of my career. And what I did there was help generate what they called knowledge nuggets and resources. I was in the HD group with Maris. And when I arrived, everyone was like, oh, you have to make a knowledge nugget. And I thought these people are not well. And then within a week, I was also dancing around going, I've made a knowledge nugget. And what was really interesting is these nuggets of knowledge that would then get sent to different countries to advise ministers of education on different topics. They would be really well researched and really well rounded, but no one knew that it was a 29-year-old Canadian who developed it, who'd reached out to my Canadian friends. So there was definitely a sort of, oh, Canada theme to my work. So when I left the World Bank and went back to do my doctorate, I started to think about what we know and how we share it in education. And I was intrigued by the concept of knowledge management, where we've got tacit knowledge, which is what we know, and explicit resources, which Louise has just touched on, in terms of what we know and turning it into something that you don't need me to talk about. You can actually look at it and tear it apart ourselves. So what I did my thesis on was looking at how do organizations and school districts create opportunities for teachers to share and leaders to share what they know and develop their learning that way, but also encourage them to create explicit resources, so artifacts like Louise was talking about, that allow them to share that knowledge with others. So I took that and then moved to England via Santa Barbara and via the Minister of Education's office. And I've been here for about 15 years as an academic. So I run our Masters in Leadership program, which we are now starting in Qatar. So Asma and I will cross paths. But there's 4 things that I work on when it comes to leadership development. One is around generational theory and our different generations of leaders approaching their work and their own development in different ways. And the answer to that is yes. I work a lot around diversity. So understanding more about who gets to sit at our leadership tables, and are we doing enough as individual leaders and as organizations to make sure that the people that are leading our organizations have a breadth of experience. And in the case of England, sadly, that is no. Most of our leaders in all of our organizations are quite posh and from England. And it's a real struggle even for me to be an outsider because I talk funny. Take that as you wish. We spend a bit of time working on in-groups. And so as a member of an in-group, for me to talk to Canadians of my generation, it's really easy. We share same cultural references and same language. But for me to be credible in England as an academic, there's things that people need to see in me and understand about me for me to be credible. So we spend a bit of time working with principals and doing research around how much does that matter when the principal is not part of the in-group of their teachers and staff. And finally, I've spent quite a lot of time of late, and I'm doing a workshop on Thursday for the Ontario Principals Council around leadership well-being. And can we bring leaders together not to be told how to be well, a little bit about how can we work with them to help them create space to take care of each other and take care of themselves, but also a little bit about how can you guilt a principal into wanting to take care of themselves. We struggle a lot with principals who put themselves at the back behind students and behind teachers and then behind their families, and they rarely look out for themselves. So we've come up with some interesting ways of saying, if you don't take care of yourself and do your job in a way that makes you look like you have a good life and good leadership, the next generation of leaders will not want to lead. So we spend our time in that space. So Louise attracted me to the program with the concept, but it's been really amazing to learn more about it. And I've also put her in touch with some fabulous business leaders in England more recently who've decided that they want to replicate the program or something like it in the UK. So thanks for the invite. It's delightful to be here, and talking about leadership development with colleagues around the screen is a real joy.
Thank you very much, Karen. Wow, thanks. And now the last panelist, and then we're going to ask you to capture just the nuggets that you took from these 5 panelists. So please be ready to do that. And if you feel that you've already got a nugget that you want to capture, I say to people that this is part of our adult learning process of capturing and sharing and mining for gold. So please do share in the chat function. The next person to speak is Katja Sim, who's a professor of education at the University of Johannesburg. She's our local thought leader. Kat, you share an interest in principal leadership development. I would love to hear a little bit from you.
Thanks, Louise. I think that the synergy between the work that we are doing here and the way in which we're going about the work of leadership and the way in which we're developing our leaders have such synergy across everybody that has spoken this afternoon. And it's so great to hear that across the divide, we are all talking the same language. So really, thank you, Louise, for bringing this group together. In my capacity in the Department of Education Leadership Management in the Faculty of Education at the University of Johannesburg, I work primarily with students who are aspiring to be leaders and with in-service leaders who are actually then wanting to take their leadership development forth. We infuse quite a bit of the kind of thinking that gets principles and leadership into the idea that despite all of the other commitments, one of the biggest commitments that sometimes gets waylaid is really around how to institute an environment and a culture of learning if learning is going to be the core business of schools. Knowing that a place like South Africa, everything speaks to crisis, and we have had a lot of conversation and research centered around what could be done around resolving some of the country's problems. One of the things that we have realized is that agency, resilience, and authentic, development of leaders for their contextual realities are one of the things that we definitely have to focus on in order to create small steps towards system-wide change. So I think the work of Partners for Possibilities and others who are really at the cutting edge of innovation and partnerships on how school leaders need to be developed are things that the Faculty of Education is really involved with on a large-scale basis. Part of the work that we do is within the programs, but we also do quite a bit of projects in the communities. One project in particular that might be of interest to the group is work that is being done at a pilot stage at the moment with 10 Limpopo school principals who are working in a program called the Sandbox that is run by the NECT, that's the Department of Education's Innovation Hub. And in that particular project, I work with the principals in order to work on ways in which to lead a culture of learning, but also what kind of environment should leadership, co-create together with their leadership teams, their SMTs, their SGBs, their communities, in order to have a synergy, in terms of the kind of skills development that would be required for the 21st century. Now, in our country, one of the things that we struggle with is high levels of inequality, which I'm sure is also the case in many other countries. And in that particular case, the divide is just, expanding in ways that are exponential, especially within right now the digital divide that is causing quite a bit of difficulties on how leadership needs to still make learning happen. So my particular sort of view on this conversation is really coming from the idea of how can we use funds of knowledge? How can we use authentic, innovations and ways in which social development can take place that stimulate a culture of learning within our school environments and not superimpose a one-size-fits-all or a particular recipe book style structure, but also empower and give leaders that exist within these contexts, the space and the room to be able to work with leaders in other spaces, as Louise and others are doing, in order to be able to develop the kind of schools that will make a learning happen even for our most poorest communities. So in our sense, our task is a big one, and we believe that the development of leadership in this particular kind of way is one of the ways in which we are going to resolve some of the fundamental issues that plague our country, on an overall basis. We would like that even a child in a rural area should have an equal opportunity, and equality does not look the same across all contexts. And so being mindful of that and being mindful of the fact that a lot of our leaders have to make something out of nothing. And that is a reality in our country that is there. So agency, resilience, and networking across the leadership, divide. But also at the same time, there was an interesting saying that spoke about leaders are people who develop other leaders, not followers. And I think I'm sitting with that mantra at the moment. And so thank you, Louise, for inviting me and for also allowing me to be a part of this beautiful discussion.
Thank you so much, Kat. So, so what I want to do now is just, in the spirit of adult learning, just create a moment for everybody to just reflect on what you've now heard from these 5 amazing people, and maybe just capture your top nugget, the one key takeaway that you've got from that. And if you can capture it in the chat, you are helping us co-create that kind of those insights. And it's different from reading what people have said from listening to the recording. So just a moment, and then I am going to put Professor Volmink on the spot, because Prof, you are so on the spot puttable. Would you just, maybe while people are capturing their takeaways from these 5 thought leaders, if you were willing to just say, what did you take away from what you've heard? And sorry for putting you on the spot. You just have to unmute yourself, Prof. I didn't arrange this with him, so I have to apologize 3 times.
So Lorraine, these are wonderful inputs that I think we can all benefit from. I want to thank all the panelists. It's good to see you, Brian. We still have some unfinished work together, but I enjoyed each and every input here. And they come together in a collage of ideas that help us here in this context think thoughts that we otherwise would not have thought. I do think that leads me to again remind myself of the complexity of the task that the principal faced. Now, I know, Louise, you have done a doctorate in complexity and so on, but for me, I think that dealing with complexity is dealing with a mess. And you have to know that there may not be one solution, but there are always choices. And when I listen to a variety of opinions like this, I understand I'm beginning to understand what the core issues are. And once I know what the core issues are, I can decide I can do core issue number 2 and number 5 and number 6 for now. And I will work on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor. And as I said before, Professor's been one of the people who've really challenged us to think about our work in a very meaningful way. And it's always a privilege. He's also the chairman of Umalusi. For those of you who don't know, Umalusi is our kind of body that has oversight about what happens in education in South Africa. So thank you for all of the nuggets that are being copied, being captured. I've just kind of had a very quick look at that. There's lots of wonderful things and insights and perspectives. And so I want to encourage you to make the most of that. So we're going to do a bit of a segue now into specifically the program that many of us have devoted large chunks of our lives to, Partners for Possibility. The book has just been published. We sent the book to all 5 of these panelists a while ago, and we asked them to give us an endorsement, and every one of them gave us a beautiful endorsement. And I want them to talk a little bit about why. Why did they, what was it about the stories in the Partners for Possibility book? So the book is called Partners for Possibility, Stories of Impact, and it's the last 10 years of our journey. And so they've been reading these stories. It's very human, very personal stories. So my question to the panelists, and they're going to respond to the questions that struck them and that they want to respond, was why have you been inspired by the stories? What struck you about the stories? Why do these stories give you hope? And a little bit of a cheeky question, if you were an advisor to the South African Education Minister, would you advocate for more programs like Partners for Possibility? If so, why? And then a very challenging question, which if anybody is brave enough to answer this question, we would be very interested in your thoughts. What are your thoughts on evaluating a program like Partners for Possibility? Because many people think the only thing that matters is academic results. Do you agree, or do you have a different perspective? What about stories, as Cap told in the book? Because these are difficult to quantify. Do these stories matter, and if so, why? And this time, we've asked the panelists to respond in a slightly different order. So first to go is Karen Edge from the UK.
Thank you. If you haven't read the book yet, it really is brilliant. And I think lots of us on the panel and other places will get asked to read lots of books. And sometimes you read them because you have faith that the author has done a good job. Sometimes you read them because you've learned little bits of things about a program. And for me, it was because I'd seen Louise sort of discuss the work that she had been involved in. I've worked quite closely with Asma, and when the WISE Foundation gives an award to an organization, they don't do it lightly. And it occurred to me that Louise had obviously articulated some really powerful stories, but when they were recognized by WISE, it made me sort of sit back and look again. And then when the book came, I was really thrilled to have a chance to sort of have an early look at what it was about. So for me, what I found so powerful about the book and the stories was that it really is about relationships. And I think often in education, we get tied to metrics and structures and accountability and systems. And we forget that at the heart of what we do as educators is build relationships. So as teachers, we build relationships with each other and with parents and with students. Our students build relationships with each other. Our teachers build relationships with their principals. And what the book did for me was remind me that not only did the P4P have to build relationships within their own team, but then you had to build relationships with business leaders to convince them that this was a good idea. You had to build relationships with principals to convince them that this was a good idea. And both the business leaders and principals had to be open to the fact that if they were building a new relationship with someone, they would be pressed and changed in a way that they probably didn't anticipate. And I think that moment to pause and really think about what is it about what we do that's really important came to light. For me, the other thing that I thought was really powerful was the fact that as a social entrepreneur, you could read the book and learn more about South Africa, but also learn more about the journey of actually being a social entrepreneur. And I think it's very rare. You usually have sort of biographies or stories about people who built their companies, but you rarely have the stories of the people who worked around them and the people who lived the experience of that. So for me, it was sort of a really brilliant weaving together of all sorts of stories and narratives. Around the question of what advice would I give a government, which is one of my favorite questions, is that it's invest in relationships. So if you look at the structure of your education system, every point in your system that could do damage either in the short term or long term to the trust and relationship that exists between a principal and a teacher, between a principal and a parent, between a teacher and a student, those are the places where you need to invest in programs or interventions that help hold those relationships together. And something like P4P does that extraordinarily well. So whether funding more of your partnerships is the solution, that is up to the government, but funding programs that support partnership, I think that is where the key to our success is, rooted in, of course, in sort of extraordinary leadership and excellent student achievement. And related to the question about evaluation, there are lots of people on the call who are much more savvy in terms of quantitative analysis than I am. I spend my life in comparative, multinational, qualitative spaces. And I think that what we often do is we think of narratives or stories as just that. And then we think of numbers as evidence. And I think that there's evidence that Shelby and others can talk about. We work in it where student learning is what we often judge in terms of numbers and exams. If you've watched the news in England, you'll see that that's been an epic disaster over the last week. But teacher learning and knowledge is often a proxy. If teachers are more efficacious, if they have better content knowledge, if they have better pedagogical knowledge, there's a relationship between that and student outcomes. So there's a way of crafting stories, which, you know, I learned a little bit about at the World Bank and through my own research, where you construct narratives in a way that you can look across them and see what the patterns are. And you can also find a way to validate those stories by gathering them in a similar way. So they are narratives, but you're able to use them as a larger data set around qualitative research. So I think one of the things we have to do in education is to think more about the proxies. So, you know, what can we do for our teachers that will help them be stronger teachers, because we know that that will make a difference for student outcomes. But we also have to consider, as Kat said, that the communities that some of our teachers and leaders are working in, and I would argue there's challenges in every community, those are the things that will often hold students back. So it's the relationships that we can create and the knowledge we can create that helps everybody understand that people are coming from different places and how can we help them do the best that they can.
Thank you so much, Karen. I do want to say to Shelby, Brian, Kat, and Asma that you've got 4 minutes for this question, not just 3. So thank you, Corinne, for setting leading the pack there. The next person to answer that same question is Shelby. Shelby, would love to hear from you.
Great. So the first question was to really think about what captivated me in the book and why I wanted to read it and report on it. And one of my areas of interest is really how we design leader preparation and development and how we continuously improve it. So I'm really deep into the actual design mechanisms that make something efficacious from a developmental perspective. And one of the things that I want to really draw our attention to, and it builds from something that Karen was talking about, she related it in the notion of a relationship, and I want to build it into the notion of mentoring and coaching. That the literature would suggest that when we think about learning design, multi-element learning designs that have both large group and very personalized mechanisms for learning really are desired when we're thinking about how we design a learning experience. And the programs in South Africa, while they have training modules, they really emphasize the notion of individualized learning through a mentoring coaching relationship. And the literature would suggest that that element of the design becomes critical. That element of the design is a central feature of your programs. And what to me is extremely powerful beyond that is that you've thought very carefully about how to bring that sort of mentoring coaching relationship to bear, even in a rural setting. So many programs stumble in terms of how to find a mentor or a coach. And when you start to do the environmental scan of your community and begin to think about how to find a mentor or a coach within that community, that to me is so powerful. And so the notion of bringing forward a mentoring coaching relationship is really critical to learning design, and being able to do that in any sort of community, regardless of sort of the spatial resources, to me is something that's very powerful. I spent a lot of time researching leadership coaching and development. And so seeing how this has been designed and what it enables in leader development to me is really important. So that's a big part of what's drawn me to it. There's some what I would call elegant features in this learning design, and it is highly scalable because you do an audit of your community to think about how to bring forward the resources that are going to be really critical to the learning design. So that's a part of it. The second part of the question related to how we think about program evaluation, and that is something that I'm really steeped in. Karen talked about that as being something that I sort of roll around in all the time. So let me say that I think, to begin with, when we are program designers, one of the first things that I think we need to begin with is developing what I call a logic model of what we envision we're going to impact from our learning design. And the logic model suggests proximally what are the things that we're most going to impact first. And that I think should be things that are about leader learning and leader development and the practices that we want to see this person be able to bring to bear on their school. Those are the very first things that we're going to see, like a chain of events or like dominoes. But then we need to think about the distal things. If we get leaders to do these new things, what will they impact? And there are a variety of things that they should be able to impact in their organization. There are a variety of things they should impact in terms of teacher quality. And there are a variety of things they should impact related to the students. And so in a logic model, we start to think about those things out loud. So what I would encourage people to do who are program engagers or developers is to begin working with others to develop that sort of logic model and talk with a variety of people to say, okay, what do we want leaders to be able to do in our context? I think that varies from place to place. I don't think you can automatically port something, from my program to yours and say the things that we want leaders to do in Chicago are the things that you're going to want leaders to do in South Africa. But you begin by saying, what do we want our leaders to do? Because those will impact certain things in the organization, instruction, and in students. And let's talk out loud to see if we can come to agreement. When I think about students, I think about their life outcomes. And so, yes, there is this notion of student learning, and we can tie metrics to that. But I also want to think very broadly about what are the life outcomes that we want our kids to have, and can we name those? Because then I think we can start to say, are there stories that are revealing to us of whether some of those life outcomes are being developed or not? I think stories can become very powerful, but they become even more powerful when we can name the kind of life outcomes that we're desiring, and when we can ask questions in a qualitative way as a researcher to see whether those outcomes that we're desiring are being told to us through stories from students and their families. But I think they are things that we really do value. In my work in Chicago, we say as a center, the center that I lead in Chicago, we are really interested in using leaders as a solution for changing life outcomes for children. And so I do think that your programs in South Africa really are impacting those things, but I would encourage you to name them. What are the life outcome kinds of things that you want to see kids doing at various points along the way and articulating? And what do you want their families to be able to articulate? And then I want you to be asking them those sorts of questions to uncover where they're at in that journey to those sorts of outcomes that you desire.
Thank you, Shelby. Oof, lots in there. We'll be listening to what you've just said again and again, and may even engage a little bit further around that. Asma, what struck you? Asma sent me a note a few days ago. She said, you know, I've read the book again and so enjoyed the story. So Asma, just your response to what you've read in the book.
Thank you, Louise, and congratulations again on an amazing book. I think what struck me the most is the importance and power of telling stories. And I think Shelby mentioned this point, but I want to emphasize on this. And my favorite quote in the book is from Chimamanda. It's a long quote, but it's the power of that many stories matter, and the stories can be used to empower and to humanize. So when we share experience in real time, and its impact becomes so much more powerful because we are offering a lens from which to view a practice or an outcome. I used a very similar methodology in my recent book, the Qatari Portraits, Lessons Learned from the Educational Reform, and emphasizing or looking at the role of school leadership in leading the reform, and to describe the experience of school leaders during Qatar educational reform. And I do believe it's not until you can put yourself in someone's shoes that you can recognize the details of a situation. And this is the powerful of stories. But I want to link also this approach or this methodology to what's happening now with COVID-19. As we have seen firsthand from the impact of this crisis, globally, there is so much more to education than traditional academic assessment. And perhaps more than ever, policymakers are starting to realize that. The importance of learner agency, social and emotional skills and well-being, and collaboration have been key factor of successful learning programs during this crisis. While academic skills development is very important, as a mother, I know how reading and writing and math are really important for our children. But traditional assessment is not going anywhere soon, I think, and I hope that schools and systems are starting to recognize and evaluate the non-academic skills equally important to what successful learning outcomes look like. And the link here, I think, telling stories and sharing qualitative indicators becomes so important here, of telling, not only focusing on traditional assessment, but using these tools to communicate the learning that is happening during such critical time. Also, the book provides further proof that the solution to school leadership development is often lies into community-based approach. I know Shelby also mentioned this earlier, and Luis, you had a great quote in the introduction about this, and I'm quoting you here. I believe that our future lies in local community-based solutions implemented by an active and engaged leader. So this is how we improve education systems. Another point that has always struck me about Partners for Possibility, and frankly, this is why this program was previously WISE Awards winner, is the innovation. Innovation at the core of this program. Because in education, we are always complaining that we are behind the business world in terms of change, innovation, transformation. And I think this program, it draws directly from the business world and the success of the sector's agile leadership approach to inform and improve education. And from my point of view, this is revolutionary. So my last point here, sharing a challenge. I think through, I reflected based on the stories shared in the book and the sections at the end of each narrative, but also a point, Louise, you brought earlier about when Shelby and Karen shared or described this program, and seeing your smile, because when other people describe the program and see the impact like you see it in the ground, I think that's powerful. So the challenge for all of us who are involved in either designing or implementing is how we assess, how we evaluate, but also adding to that, how can we share the impact? And I'm glad you are putting, these narratives and stories that other stakeholders can see it. So how can we share what we see with different stakeholders? And in the first chapter, you mentioned, Louise, a reflection on a conversation with a funding organization and the challenge of how to help other stakeholders see the impact that we all see and believe in such programs, because improving systems, improving students' outcomes, either academic or non-academic, and well-being, and supporting school principals, it won't come from top down. It needs to be empowered from the bottom up approach, and continuous supporting school leaders and continuing empowering them and having these organizations that will support that type of learning. So at the end, I'm sharing a reflection and things came from the stories, but something I face when I work with local schools here. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you so much, Asma. As you can all see, I'm just so enjoying these different perspectives on the work we've been immersing ourselves into. Brian, you and I have had a few conversations about this under Trees. You've read the book. Very keen to hear your reflections on having read the book and those questions that I posed earlier.
Great. Thanks, Louise. I'm going to make 3 points, and they're all variations on the theme of both and. So my first one is, what would I say to the Minister of Education? What I would say to the Minister of Education, first of all, is read this book. And why? Because when you work in the education sector, one tends to be surrounded by technical professionals. The people who study pedagogy, the people who are the economists who study systems, the people who study those narrow areas. And one thing we've learned is, if you have a hammer, you see nails everywhere. Each technical professional sees the solution to the problem as being their specific skill. And one of the consequences is that agency, the evocation of agency and energy, it gets lost. And this, from my experience this last decade, engaging a lot in these education spaces, this is an occupational hazard in the area. So I'd say read this book, support this as well. That's my first comment. Then second, how to evaluate. This is tricky. As a South African, I love the nation building dimension of what you're doing. the sense of shared citizenship that comes from it. But as someone who's thought a lot about organizations, I worry that when we have multiple goals, we are always able to say, well, I didn't achieve this, but I did achieve that. So, and what I'm going to say now is tied mostly to primary schools. Read for meaning by age 10 as a goal strikes me as urgent and necessary. And from conversations with Louise, I'm going to mention a name, someone who I've spoken a lot about this, a fellow called Johnny Gewisser, an organization called EMEC, who does something similar. I am persuaded, and I believe, Louise, you would agree with this, that when the PFP process works, read for meaning scores would also be strong. They're correlated with many things. So I would say to you, in fact, a quick narrow story on this came out from our research. In Kenya, learning outcomes are measured at the end of primary school. The results are posted publicly. In Kenya, when a school does well, the community gives the principal a parade. When the school does badly, measured by learning outcomes, the community actually puts pressure on the principal to either improve or leave. So measure learning outcomes, measure read for meaning, put the results in the public domain because it's part of building the ecosystem. So that's my sort of somewhat, if you like, hard-nosed answer on measurement. Then third, also in the spirit of both and, it's a nugget I took from the book. I was really intrigued by the Letsitele example. And what intrigued me about the Letsitele example was the way in which that the embedded relationships that were built had among their consequences a determined outreach on the part of the school and the partners to bring in technical support around the instructional core. They reached out, they brought in with Kami Maths, Brain Boosters, the Language Institute, and in a sense what we saw with that was that one of the consequences of evoking agency is it evokes a commitment and eagerness to also, both and, to also find access to the skilled technical resources that improve learning and learning outcomes. So in a sense, that's also a challenge. To avoid the hammer and nail problem is something that those of us who think about the evocation of agency challenge educationalists with. But to avoid the hammer and nail problem, those of us, we also, if we think about agency, should be challenged by saying, yes, how do we also, as part of strengthening the ecosystem, enhance access to those kinds of technical resources? And that, it seems to me, is an interesting frontier for partners of possibility. So thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And again, the challenge for us, we were able to tell 40 stories out of 1,300. And I can tell you that a lot of that is happening. What you will also be excited about is this year, we have added as a key outcome for primary schools, reading for meaning by 10 years old. So it has become a very big part of us because we see it as a national priority given our very, very poor reading and literacy results. I want to now go to Kat, and also just want to say to everybody else on the call, after we've heard from Kat, we do have about 5 or so minutes to hear from a few people. So if you want if you're very keen to say something, not just in the chat, but actually verbally, if you could start to get ready and put your hand up so that I can come to you after Kat. But first, go to Katja Sim, Professor Katja Sim.
I have a science background, which means that numbers was my thing for a very, very long time. And when I entered my postgraduate work, I suddenly dove myself into the world of qualitative research. And more recently, I've been working a lot with particularly visual participatory research, because the kind of research that I do really has got transformation and researching with people rather than on them at the heart of the agenda. I also became very convinced with visual work because it taps into the areas of thinking that do not necessarily get tapped into during traditional interview or focus groups and other kinds of session. And they bring about a kind of a community, a community collaboration. And so the agency resides then with the people involved in the research to then find their own solutions to their own problems. So the Partners for Possibility advocation for stories, for narratives, for being able to show impact through voices. And I think for me, your entire brainwave and aha moment around the word Symphonia, Louise, was the one thing that really, really struck me as what is perhaps missing from the way in which we go about thinking about what impact actually means, and the fact that voices matter. Now, in a country like South Africa, you would know that we live with a legacy of colonization. And so for the voices of the decolonized voices and the marginalized, for them to actually have their voices in a room and for them to be heard and for their agency to be developed, as well as for a place for indigenous knowledge and indigenous languages, has been something that we've been grappling with for a very long time. So one of the things that really not just with this book, but with the first book as well, was taken by, heart and soul, was the fact that you went into those voices. And that for me is a very, very powerful way in which to be able to share the kind of work that matters. So for me to be able to use this kind of work in the work that I do, following on with leaders, as well as within the classroom where we work in programs that prepare leaders, again opens up the idea that we can actually get a sense of impact. And I think for a country like South Africa, just looking at the large-scale research that has been done around statistics and so forth. And I don't discount that information is important and it does have a place and it does have a value. But I think that the synergy between that kind of information, as well as actually the stories and the vignettes from the ground, hold a place as well. And so one of the things that I do want to encourage you to do is to not question whether the way in which you're going about sharing your impact, using the kind of voices that primarily emerge from the stories that you share. Don't discount the fact that that actually does show a heap of impact that numbers can never ever quite capture or quite share. So that's kind of on the one hand. The other thing is that they become perfect case studies to be able to give hope. And I think that that's where, for me, the most important, because when you're working with a system that has been that has gone through so many transformation processes, that there is a fatigue around yet another change, yet another brainwave, yet another thing to add onto our plates. And the fact that it is always a top-down approach rather than an integrated, bottoms-up, more authentic way of doing things, that your approach to leadership and leadership development captures, I think is one of the things that I really appreciate. I also feel that I would agree with Brian that one of the things that we do need to do is to be able to ask that people in positions of decision-making do read the book. And maybe if we can actually start to make these books more widely available to those people, where they can perhaps be then given some insights into real people and real experiences on the ground. I also captured the fact that leadership is not about everything going perfect and everything working out. But the idea of failing forward is also mentioned in your book. The idea that sometimes things don't go according to plan, but the learning that happens through that becomes insightful as well. And so for me, I think the weaving of the various stories and the weaving of the various experiences that people have had in various communities and through various perspectives is extremely powerful. So I would definitely, advocate that this book be read far and wide and be made available even to programs where we are preparing leaders of the future. So for me, your book matters, and I think that you have done an immensely great job in making these stories available. I also think it also uses the actual names of the people. It uses the schools where this have nothing in here is remote and anonymous. So there's a humanity and a humanism in here that in a sense, is captured that is not necessarily captured in many other places. And I do think that these are people that others can draw on, even within their circles, to be able to then make a difference. Because one of the things that we do experience is that leaders do feel pretty isolated and they do feel pretty alone. And these stories then give them insights into who are the networks that they could connect to. In the work that I do work with principals that are part of the Partners for Possibility program. And if I had to share some of that research that we did with metaphor drawing and collages and photo voice and all kinds of other sort of instruments that we've used, we find that the insights of principals that are part of the Partners for Possibility program is a lot more engaging and a lot more insightful. And the kind of questions that they ask are really deeply immersed into context. And so, you know, that's one of the things that I can endorse in terms of where your approach has actually worked, you know, for leaders out there. We are also encouraging our leadership to also start to do things like create digital identities, start to blog about their experiences, and find ways in which to share their experiences through their stories and through what they do in various forums. And so in small ways, I think you have created already a big impact by writing the books and making them available. And, you know, all I can really say is that just keep going, you know, with what it is that you're doing. I often say that sometimes you don't have to show what you do, but the work can speak for itself because it already has impacted lives. So from my side, I mean, I think that I have already indicated some very good synergy, and, you know, we are looking at ways in which we will be able to work together, you know, right now and in the future. But for me, this book is a must read. And so, you know, for my colleagues who are on here, Raj and others, I do have a copy, which I can definitely share with you. So Louise, I don't know if that sort of sums it up.
Thank you so much, Kat. We kind of had to just allow some people to just run over a little bit. So we don't have lots of time to hear from people who are on the call, but if you want to say something, I will just keep my eye on the mute and unmute. If anybody unmutes himself, we're going to probably have an opportunity for about 3 people to speak. So just, if you want to speak, just unmute yourself and then we'll hear your voice. Edna Frankel. Edna, you can speak.
Congratulations on a fantastic webinar. And I think the recording should be very widely distributed and publicized because it's essential viewing for everybody in education. Well done.
Thank you so much, Edna. Raj, I see you were unmuted and I just muted you because we don't want to have too much background noise. So Raj, love to hear from you.
Okay, firstly, I must confess I don't have the book, but Professor Yassine Ket has now offered to loan me that book, so I'm quite interested in reading that. I just want to mention one thing that is very, very important from what I've been hearing from the various speakers here. And I think it's important to understand that we come from a background of providing a lot of professional development for principals. And one of the things that we have as a serious problem is that, and as much as, and I've written quite a bit as well, done a lot of research around this, is that sometimes we don't seem to contextualize our problems. And the problems of principals, and the way I describe principles of South Africa to be more the kind of leadership, it's more a compliant leadership, where you find that there's lots of rules and regulations, too much of legislation that they've got to understand. And so this becomes a serious problem in terms of wanting principals to be creative and wanting to empower them. In fact, in my last article that I've written was about empowering principals, and we're looking at how best we can get principals to take on their role as principals, that instructional leadership role. Currently, they got so much of other work that they are doing. They have to balance their administrative work. They've got the issue around learner discipline, and really to become effective principals is not so easy. So I would like, in fact, I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to communicate with you so that we could begin to link up and begin to share some of our, and I'm talking about also Professor Duplessis, who's also now listening to you as well, so that we can share some of those experiences that we have. We are currently, just in closing, we're currently doing a lot of training in Mpumalanga, and part of the training was having short learning programs for principals, but converting it to the advanced diploma in education for leadership and management. So we hope that if we can communicate with you and begin to start some kind of partnership, they will be then the partners for possibilities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. And I just want to say, yes, yes, and. Because what you're doing and what we're doing is very different, but when you bring them together, 1 + 1 becomes 10. And that story of Letitele, which is chapter 2 of the book, is a story where we started with kind of management 101, and then partners possibility came in, and then other people came, and the impact on those schools in Letitele has just been amazing. So we can spend the whole day in this conversation, but we don't have the whole day. So we want to do a final round of very brief feedback from, or just not feedback, thoughts, responses, final thoughts. And this time we'll do it in the order of Kat, then Shelby, Asma, Brian, and Corin will have the last word. So just before they all speak, just huge appreciation for everybody who's on this call. We have recorded the call. We will be sharing the recording. Edna, I hope lots of people will watch it. And there will be another call similar to this, because there were a whole bunch of people who we wanted to have on this call today who couldn't join us, but will join us at another time. So last final thoughts from Kat, and then Shelby, Asma, Brian, and Corin. Kat, over to you.
So just in closing, I would like to give you a huge congratulations, Louise, on pulling together a highly successful seminar for sharing across the continent and across the world in terms of the work that needs to happen and that is already happening and underway. For me, the synergy that has emerged in the way in which we see leadership and leadership development is both heartwarming, relieving, and I'm almost, sort of yelping with delight right here, because there's so many people, like-minded people on this forum that we can now begin to take the process forward with. And I really want to thank everybody for contributing and for joining. Very intrigued with all of the chats, and I look forward to the recording that will come at a later stage. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you very much, Kat. Shelby.
I just want to say thank you for allowing me to participate. When I'm embedded in networks like this, I end up making connections to people who are always really important learning resources to me. And so I appreciate having this opportunity, because I know that along the way, there'll be people that I'm able to learn from, not just from our conversation today, but in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Shelby. It was wonderful to have you with us. Asma.
Thank you, Louise. I want to end with one general point related to the discussion, but also another point related to my work and more specifically All In. So the key capability we're going to need to improve education systems is the capacity to continuously support principals, supporting them to learn and continuously improve. Raj just mentioned how to the importance of helping leaders to focus on learning and teaching rather than only the admin part. So we need to build organizations and processes that put a real focus on adult learning, so adults can learn about their practices. Also, to have sustained improvements is to systematically enhance the experts of our teachers and school leaders. So we have experts who make the right call at the right time in their unique context. This is how we improve education. The last point related to All In, through the work I'm leading at WISE and through our leadership network, the Agile Leaders of Learning Innovation Network, which we are proud that Partners for Possibility and so many contributors here are part of this global platform that we started in 2017. We are working together in a networked learning community to put programs like Partners for Possibility and others on the map as examples of best practices and innovation in leadership development and school improvement. Through targeted advocacy programs and research, we can support future prepared school systems. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Asma. Brian, your final thoughts.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see the energy that you've brought, Louise, the critical mass of people that have come together, the momentum that you have. The frontier, it seems to me, is how to now have conversations not just amongst the but conversations across the stovepipes, and how to catalyze and foster takeaways and learnings from the others whose approaches are seemingly the opposite of ours. Because I think in the space of education and learning outcomes, that's going to be key.
Fantastic. And that's a good challenge. Thank you. And then last but not least, Karen Edge.
Excellent. So I've also just found out about a second ago that my mom is successfully out of surgery. So I've wiped my eyes. We're good to go. Thank you, everybody, for such a good time. There's one thing I want to say, and it resonates across all the things that we've talked about individuals and how we see them and what they manage to do. And one of the things that and it's a thank you to Louise and a plea. So one of the things that we will say often about women leaders is that they are a force of nature or a ball of fire. And the number of times I've seen Louise's name cross my Twitter with somebody like Tom Peters, other people say she's a force of nature. I think we forget how much skill and ability and dedication and wisdom it takes to be perceived as a force of nature. And often when we say that about someone, we're not recognizing their skills and abilities and the practice and the dedication it's taken. We're attributing it to something else. And what I want to say is thank you for being able to do what you do and to bring everybody together. And to everybody else, and including me, I've banned force of nature from my vocabulary, because often we use it when we're not comfortable saying that is an extraordinary leader who's going to ruffle feathers, who's going to cause problems, who's going to bring people together. And I think that by using terms or not acknowledging that leadership comes in different shapes and sizes, different colors, different genders, different religions, we miss something. So it's been an absolute joy. My mom is okay, which is good. Thank you, Louise, for bringing us together. And I think, Brian and Asma and Kat and Shelby and everybody else on the call, and Raj, I heard what you said. Context matters, but there's a lot that we can learn from each other. So as you're talking about leaders, as you go forward, they may be a force of nature, but just call them what they are, which is extraordinary, remarkable, hardworking, able. And I think it would help all of us be able to walk forward with a bit more of a lifted head, knowing that it wasn't just being attributed to something else. So thank you so much. I'm going to go cry because my mom's okay. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. I think we could all hang around for the rest of the day. We look forward to when we can face to face. But for now, thank you very much. I am going to ask my Partner for Possibility colleagues, the members of the team, those who can, to just hang on the call for a few more minutes for us to just do a quick debrief. Everybody else, thank you, thank you, thank you. We loved being with you. We will invite you again. We'll continue to have challenging conversations and inspirational conversations, and go well. Thank you so much.